This is an excerpt from my forthcoming novel, Thinspace, to be published by Montag Press. I also am doing a sort of like sci-fi Americana performance as Space Cowboy Solomon. That's another thing that I do. So this is an excerpt that leads into a rather hallucinogenic experience for a young man who is like sort of caught in in servitude to the artificial intelligence that is within his chip. Okay. The moment the door was closed, he reached behind his dresser and untaped the little plastic container for the third time. He had nothing left to lose. At first, nothing happened. Isaac simply continued his vigil as his in-phone set his thoughts to a heroic soundtrack. It began as a metallic taste in his mouth, which, when he thought about it, was a fishhook that ran through his tongue like a piercing, the haft down his throat into the body where it disappeared. It wasn't painful, but the music pulled at it gently with a faint sense of hunger, as though his throat were a limitless pipeway to the wharf where bearded longshoremen bundled and shipped the throbbing bass to echo down the fleshy corridors, beating his hanging tonsils like a boxer working a bag. He snapped upward from his book and looked out the window. Suburbia was the same, except there was a slight discrepancy at the seams. Yes. When he looked more closely, he could see the houses were made of cardboard, and he was looking at the number tabs holding them together, artifacts of the Build-A-House assembly instructions written on the inside walls. It was all as neatly glued as a Happy Meal box, with the edges perfectly square. So, it had begun. Out of the corner of his eye, the keyboardist in his poster lunged out over his keyboard toward him, briefly and without malice, as a way of self-expression. When Isaac fixed upon him, he sat stark and still as American Gothic, but with a mischievousness glinting beneath the dour visage, as though if he looked away for a second his face would be split by his tongue, his eyes would bulge, and his cheeks would inflate. Ah, he knows I'm not right, thought Isaac. He felt the tugging again at his fishhook, and as he peered down it, he realized that the line ran straight from his tongue through the mind screen, disappearing up into the ether, pulsing luminescent with rainbow lights. He stepped in through his mouth, feet squishing along his tongue, and plucked it like a guitar string, sending a swirl of pixie lights racing along the translucent cord. The cord hummed a deep note that shivered through the tongue and into his feet. He patted his feet on the tongue and briefly flashed into a cat, searching for a cozy nap spot, needing a tongue bed. The fishhook must be the limbic connection, he thought with animal satisfaction, licking a piece of tuna from his whisker. Isaac stepped deeper along the line and then pulled himself to climb up toward his brain through his right sinus, hand over hand. At the top of his sinus tunnel, the line cut deep into the pink mucosal lining as it rounded the corner to stretch out nearly horizontal, and he was forced to reach and grab hold of that tight line up above after it had made the bend. He pulled himself up laboriously and emerged into a chamber. The walls were crenellated like coral and shone pinkish gray. When he looked close at them, Isaac could see the steady, slight pulsing of lifeblood, carrying millions of electrified particles, each excitedly seeking a home in the various organelles and vesicles of the brain. Before him, in the center of the chamber, the clear fiber optic fishing line he'd been climbing disappeared into the center of a glowing rectangle, a perfect screen that shone with rippling shadows like water lit from beneath, casting reflections on the ceiling in a perfect parabola. He stepped close and saw his own reflection, more real than real, all the pros and cons of himself in stark relief, against his face like pimples and jewels. Isaac slowly moved his hand closer to stroke the screen, perhaps to reveal a set of controls by swiping. But his hand melted like water. He pulled back his hand in mild surprise at the wetness there, and the surface undulated gently at the disturbance. But as he rubbed his fingers together, he realized that they weren't wet at all, but coated in a glittering film that dissipated as he rubbed it. He plunged his hands in and brought forth a cupful of the stuff, and it melted away through his fingers and fell like fairy dust or scream static, bits of it twinkling and moving as they fell back to the screen, like things alive or seized by browning motion, shooting out points of light like starlight or sparks from a wand. Funny, which is it, science or magic? Isaac was seized by an urge to see what was behind the screen, strong as an itch in a new bug bite. He tentatively pressed his face through the screen's surface and saw what appeared to be blue, pink, and green elemental spirits made of pure light, sliding up and down a translucent tube. Their faces were angular, thickly whiskered, with long noses and branch-like juttings, lit with joy as they moved up and down the tunnel, doing exactly the thing they were made to do. One swept toward him and collided with the screen around his face silently, dissipating into a light cloud of fairy dust as he leapt back, pulling his head free, sputtering. Odd. He had been breathing the whole time, underwater, and he wasn't wet. Sparkles fell from his face like gentle meteorites.